Good evening, students, or morning, or whenever you're seeing this video. So I'm going to go ahead and share out the solution to the challenge I slacked out earlier today. And so this has us working with input fields and storing that information in state and doing this thing called two-way binding. We can style the components if we want, but I'm not going to get into that. Just to focus on the React specific stuff that we're working with here. We'll go ahead and add a second input field, have our component dynamically figure out which input text is longer and display that. And then in the gold challenge, we're going to outsource the job of showing the picture to a separate component. And that picture will be kind of trippy, going back and forth between one of two as we type into the input fields. So kind of a fun little challenge. I hope you guys have been enjoying these. Even if I want to reiterate that, and I don't know that I've really said this, but the bronze level challenge is a pretty good metric for whether or not you're on pace with the content. Silver is historically being completed by students who are doing pretty well with the content. So bronze is sort of like, okay, we expect you guys to be able to get bronze done. Not necessarily fast, but you should be able to get the bronze level solution. Silver is for a lot of the people who are tracking pretty well, they're figuring things out, they feel pretty good about their, in this case, React skills. And then gold is really going to push you, and we want that. That's going to be true for a lot of technical interviews as well. You are not going to jump into a job interview, be asked a gamut of questions, and be able to answer those questions. That is not the point. The point, as I've seen it done in an interview myself, I interviewed for a company called Mimir, and as a lot of the instructors who have more industry experience have told me, they are basically going to push you to see, they want to see you break down in your knowledge, not like psychologically, but just in your knowledge to see where your gaps are. If they don't know what you don't know, then they can't be confident of what you do know, if that makes any sense. If they just ask you a bunch of questions and you're rifling through them, great on some level, but they don't really know what you're capable of. If they can find that breaking point where you just don't have that knowledge yet, I shouldn't call it a breaking point, if they can find your knowledge gaps, then that's going to let them know how strong a developer you are. And that's what they're going to try to do. So we simulate that with these challenges as well. Okay, all right, so enough of that. On to the bronze. We want a component that has an input field. We want that value from the input field to be stored in state. We want the value from state to be, wait. Okay, this is a little weird. We want to show that value somewhere. So I've got a way we can do that. Then we want an image of our choice above the input field, and we want to style it however. Okay, well, if we're keeping track of data coming from the user, we need to refactor this and make this a class component, right? We don't necessarily need, but frequently want to use a constructor. And we want to set state up to initially just hold our input value, and we'll default that to an empty string because the user won't have, we don't want anything to be there in front of the user as they come into this page. We want it to be blank. So then we'll do our render because we're in a class component. We'll return some JSX. Let's return an input field with a value. We don't have to give it a name, but we need to set a value here. If we don't set the value, then this component doesn't control the value of the input. And essentially that means, okay, let me think for just a second. Actually, let's not do the value yet. Let's just set an input field. This can be a self-closing tag, and we're going to say on change. We want to use a function. We'll call this handle change, okay? And the handle change function is going to take an event because, and Ken was talking to me earlier about this today. One thing a lot of our students aren't aware of is that all these events, from clicks to scrolls to hovers to focus to any of those things, like the interactable things that we do with our app, that is not built into React at all. That's just a like out of the box vanilla JavaScript thing. That's a web design thing. So every web page that you're viewing that is using JavaScript, which as far as I know, that's any that you're going to be interacting with, all of your apps are built into what's called the window object. The window object holds the app that you're viewing and a lot of built-ins for you. The window object, let me see if I can do this real quick and show what Ken showed me. If I inspect this, go to console, do window dot on click, you can see that it's, I'm not quite getting the syntax right, but when I do window dot, it opens up all these things that are open and available to the window object, right? And one of those things that we see, if I type on, c, on click, well, and it tells me right here, that's in the window object. So all these events, that's not a React thing, that's a web design thing. It's built into the window object for you. So we don't have to manage that event of whatever the change is, whatever event occurs, it's going to get passed along for us. We need to grab that event that gets passed along as a parameter. So we'll call that E. So let's go ahead. The whole point of this function here is to update input val as the user types. So we're going to do a this.setState. State is an object, so we'll use our curly braces. The key that we want to change inside of our state is input val. We want to update that to be e.target. E.target, if you remember from Gold Badge, is just whatever the event in this case will be like a user type. I don't know what that's called, a user input thing. If we do e.target, we're talking about the HTML element here. And then if we do .value, it's whatever is being typed in. Okay, so let's see this so far. So this is not two-way binding, but it'll be a good introduction to what two-way binding is all about. Router, sidebar, want that last route, day 3 comp. Okay, we can see in the state that the input val defaults to nothing. And then as I type, there we go, okay? As I type, the state gets updated, and it only gets updated because when there's a change, we fire the handle change function that grabs the event coming from the window object. We update the state so the input val key has the value that the user has typed in. Great, okay? That makes sense. Now, let me think for just a second. I don't have a great example for this, but what we're not doing right now, we are currently grabbing the value and updating the state, but we want the state, this is good React design in general, we want the state to be the single source of truth for whatever the user is seeing. So currently, notice the value of this input field, we're not specifying anything. It's just based upon whatever the user types in. That's not necessarily okay. And so I'm fumbling a little bit on the rationale why. So this is something that maybe I can provide you guys an article for because I don't remember offhand. We want to provide the value coming from that state. So we can say this.state.input val. Okay, so now we've got a kind of a closed circuit here. Let's see that this still does what we want it to. If I type, great. I still get an update on the screen, but we no longer have, prior to doing this, if we took out this val part, the value of the input field is uncontrolled by the component. Now it's absolutely controlled by the component. The input val and state is always the value of the input field. The user types, we detect that change, we update state. That updated state is then shown on screen. Okay, and it happens so fast that you don't notice a delay. Notice as I'm typing out here, it just feels totally natural and normal. and that's just because React is so fast. Okay, so this is your two-way binding. Click, grab that change, update state, state then updates the input field. The first binding is from the event to the input field, and input val and state, and then that state binds its value to the value of the input. So you can see sort of a loop here. We're making a circuit. Okay, all right. So I don't have a picture in here yet. I think that's the other part. I'm being a little long-winded right now. Sorry. Let me grab this URL, come back to React, and let me think about this. I just want to do image, source. We'll set that, close the tag, input val, what did I do? Oh, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Okay, I can do that. So we'll do react.fragment. We can drop this guy down a couple lines, indent those, and there we go. We got a picture. We've got an input field we can type into. I'm going to throw in after the image a break. That's also a self-closing tag, just so we've got some nice separation between picture and our input field. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like the bronze level solution is done. Okay, and let me show this code again real quick. Constructor, handle change function, render, export, set up the class, import React. Not a lot to make that work. Okay, all right, silver. Do the bronze challenge but add a second input field. Make sure that its value is also managed by state using two-way binding. Make an H1 tag below these input fields that shows the value of the input field which has the longer text. Your page may look like the below. So if we type in something in the first input field and the second input field has longer text, we're going to display the longer text that we typed in. Okay? So some of this will feel a little redundant. We're going to have another input. The value this time, well, we can't do this state.input val, because if we do that, then both input fields are going to show the same thing being typed in. We still want them to be separated. So let's have like input val 1 and input val 2. They both start as empty strings. And on change, let's be concise here and say this dot handle change is going to trigger the update for state for either input field. Okay? Now, to do this, I need some way to differentiate the first input field from the second. Right now, I don't have that. The value is referring to one of two different things in state. Great, but that's not sort of like a name for the input field. That value I can't grab hold of to refer to the input. On change, I also can't grab hold of to refer to the input. So what do? Well, we can just add a new prop here, and we can call this name equals, the name of the first one is input one. Let's do input val 1, and the name of the second is input val 2. Okay? So now what we can do, handle change is still going to grab an event. Now that event could be changing the first input field, or it could be changing the second input field. Okay, so we grab the event, but rather than updating input val, which is no longer one of our properties inside of state, we want to update, well, we want to refer to e.target. When we input into either of these, we're talking about either the first input field or the second input field. Maybe let's show that, okay? Let me do a console log of e.target here. All right, so this will, actually I'm gonna do the dot value here as well so we can see what's going on. Okay, so I'm gonna type into, I'm gonna open up my React dev tools here. Day 3 client, comp rather. The state starts as empty for both. I'm going to type into the first, Tyler, and I can see that being changed. Second one, Shelton. Okay, great. Oh, oop, and I'm changing the state wrong. That is not what I meant to do. I've got a typo somewhere because rather than changing input val 1 and input val 2, I am now making a new key inside of the state for every type, and that key is the same as the thing being typed. Oops. This should be name. Let's try this again. Open up app, browser, router, sidebar. Whoop, if I can click it, route, day 3 comp. There we go. Now let me type again. Tyler. Okay, good. We're updating input val 1. Shelton, input val 2. Sweet. Okay, cool. So how is this working? Well, we can kind of go to the console log for that. So every time we type, let me do this again. Let me clear. Autumn Henderson. Okay. Every time we type, e.target, remember, refers to the element that we're typing into. So we see that. I was typing into something, into the first input field that had a name of input val 1. And we see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Oh, 7 times because 6 letters in autumn and then I tabbed out of it. And then Henderson has however many that you see here. Okay, well, I noticed that I named these input fields in such a way that the first one is input val 1. That matches the state object we're trying to update. Input val 1 controls the value of this guy. So if I can say e.target.name, then I update exactly the key inside of state that I want to change. When I change this input, we're changing input val 1, which matches that. When I change this input, I'm changing input val 2, which matches the second key. Cool. And I can do all of this inside a single function with this clever use of, what's it called? Not box notation, square bracket notation. Okay. Think back to when you talked about keys inside of an object. You can talk about a key in an object rather than using dot the key. You can use square bracket the key with a string inside. Well, e.target.name matches this guy right here. That's a string. So by inputting the string input val 1, I reference input val 1 in my state object. Kind of cool. Okay, I don't want to belabor the point on that. That's kind of a neat idea. I'll let you guys explore that further if you're curious. So we're not yet finished with this challenge. We can change both of these, which is great. But what we don't have is an H1 below that second input that shows the longer thing that we've typed in. Okay, so it's kind of cool that we can just use a ternary to do this. You don't have to make a separate function. You can do inline conditional rendering. You can just set up a conditional statement here and that conditional statement do something. Super cool. So how do we do this? Well, let's just make a comparison. Let's do a ternary and say this.state.input val 1 dot length. If the length of the first thing we typed is greater than this.state.input val 2 dot length, then what do we want to show? Well, we want to show the first input value, right? If the first is longer than the second, show the first. So this.state.input val 1. Else this, whoop, I keep typing that, this.state.input val 2. And there we go. Okay, check it out. So now if we do autumn, okay, autumn shows up in our H1, but as we do Henderson, once we get longer, we show the Henderson input field. Take that away, and it goes back to autumn. That's pretty cool. Notice that because we're checking for input val 1 being greater than input val 2, if they're equal, it's going to show the second. We only show the first if it's longer than the second, otherwise we show the second. So if I do Tyler, that's not super helpful. Tyler Weiler, we show the second one because the second one shows when they're equal. Okay, all right, so is that silver? I think so. Okay, all right, gold level challenge says finally, make the image from the bronze challenge display through a functional component, pass the image to be displayed to the functional component as a prop, containing a URL meaning that the picture isn't saved locally. Great, we're not saving pictures locally anyway. Every time the user types into one of the input fields, make the image change in this functional component. Cool, well, kind of cool. I think this is good to play around with, but it's going to be pretty annoying on screen. But that's okay. We'll manage it. We don't have to play with it a whole lot. So day 3 comp, we're going to put a new component in here. I'll just call this display with a display.js functional component. We'll import React from React. We'll set up const display equals, we'll pull in props. And to do this, we'll return an image with a source defined by props.image. Well, let's just call it that, props.image. Okay, single image return. We will export default display like so. Cool. Okay, so notice there's no images being shown here. The source of the image will come from the parent component, day 3 comp. Okay, so let's refactor our image just a little bit. First, we need to import our display component from display. Inside the folder, you will find the file. This image thing we'll take out. We can do display here with our prop name was supposed to be image. So image, well, image is equal to, oh, that's right. Okay, so we need, if you remember the gold level challenge, it was keep flipping back and forth between the image to be displayed. So I've got 2 images up. The first we've already seen. Here's our second, okay? Just whatever I found in Google Images. And to make this work, what we can do, let's think about it for a second. So we want to, when the user types on a key, we want to show the other image. Well, so I think one easy way to do this, you have to keep, well, do you have to? So one way to do this would be to have a state property up here that was something like show image 1, and we default it to true. And then we have an image 1 handler that, I don't know, takes an event, and we do something like, this is a little bit pseudocodey, meaning this may not compile, but hopefully you get the gist of it. We say, make image 1 the opposite of whatever it is right now. So we throw a bang in front. Okay, so as the user types, we change image 1 so that rather than showing the first image, we show the second, and then as the user types again, this goes back to true, we show the first image. That's fine. That's a lot of work. That's more than I want to manage. So here's a shortcut that I see. As the user types, the total number of characters that they will have entered is going to go even, odd, even, odd, even, odd, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And even as they backspace, that's still true. So if they take away some of the stuff they've written, if they've typed out an even number, the first time they delete, they'll have an odd number of characters, and they'll just go back and forth, back and forth. And anytime they change a character, it's going to go from even to odd. So what we can do in this image prop is grabbed by display. We can show the URL we want to show by doing something like this. We can say, let's talk about, and I'm throwing these in parentheses because if you remember like order of operations PEMDAS stuff from math class, when you've got a longer comparison and you say have 3 numbers at once, it's good to use parentheses to specify to your compiler what thing needs to run first. So I'm going to say this.state.input val2 plus this.state.input val1. Okay, I want the total length of both our inputs. I'm going to find if that's even or odd by doing the modulus. Mod 2, if that's equal to 0, well, what does that mean? If, I need lengths here. Length. Okay, if the length of the second input field plus the length of the first input field, if when we divide that by 2, we get a remainder of 0, that means we have an even number of characters between the input fields. Then we want to show whatever image first. So I'm going to show the wave. Okay? And then our else can be this other guy. We can do that. Okay? All right? And something is not being liked here. Oh, I've got my image closed, but I never closed the call to my display component. So now let's check it out. Oh, and I really need some, whatever. So Autumn Henderson, and it's super trippy and goes back and forth between them. That is a little hard on the eyes, but car bar, hat, cat. There you go. You can see it tripping back and forth. And there you go. That's your gold level solution. Kind of a weird problem today, but again, hope you enjoyed it. These are fun to put together. Hope you guys enjoy the challenge. Let me know what you like about them, what you don't. Always open to feedback. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning. Adios.